It's always nice to see ideas that have gone unused for so long finally bear fruit. If you're one of those walking encyclopedias of Transformers toys like I pretend to be, you'd know that the initial offerings of Generation 2 included redecos of Starscream and Ramjet as themselves, and were the only releases of the Seeker mold in the line. However, there were other redecos planned for the mold, one of which was the eponymous SANDSTORM, but neither saw the light of day until now. Welcome to Kit Reviews. My name is Kit, and today we'll be taking a look at Transformers Select's Voyager-class Decepticon SANDSTORM. This figure was released in 2020 as part of the Earthrise phase of Selects, and is a redeco of Transformers Earthrise Voyager-class Ramjet, himself a retool of Starscream. Generation Select's SANDSTORM transforms into a heavily modified and fictional F-15 fighter jet, which is ironic considering out of all the Seekers, he's the only one with a color scheme you'd be liable to see in real life, at least outside of an air show. Like his name suggests, as well as his unique khaki and brown color scheme, SANDSTORM is obviously suited for desert warfare, where his intricate camouflage pattern would help blend him into the dunes and rocks below if seen from above. By the standards of a mass-produced toy, where paint applications are often overshadowed by the engineering, I'd say this pattern is rendered pretty well and authentically, as I was easily able to find camouflage patterns online that have more than a passing resemblance. The only real problem with it I have is that it isn't continued onto the engines. It just stops at what becomes SANDSTORM's butt plate, even though it continues onto his compound delta wings just fine. His Decepticon symbols are rendered in the same brown as his camouflage, which is a nice touch. I'd rather they have been the G2 Decepticon symbols, but I'm not too fussed over it, and it brings him in line with the other Earthrise Seekers you may or may not have in your collection. Besides, that's nothing Toy Hacks can't fix, and they have, as you'll see someday soon. I don't think anything could have fixed these engines, though. They sit way too high and so far forward that SANDSTORM's feet stick clear out the back. They're sculpted well enough, and I like the way the tail fins angle inwards, though they really should be a bit bigger. Another thing that probably should have been bigger are these null rays, which look absolutely puny stuck way out here on the ends of his wings. I vastly prefer placing them here on what will become SANDSTORM's knees, as the guns get sucked in towards the body, and as such, look more appropriate. This brings us to the nose, where my favorite detail lies. This little gremlin shark face. It's so characterful, and really helps set him apart from the other Seekers. Instead of being Ramjet, who is the color of my pants now, SANDSTORM comes off as someone who is thrilled with a dogfight, and probably shows off in front of his comrades. This detail alone does a lot to pull him out of the abyss of banality, I feel. Still, there remains a fault that really shouldn't have been here in the first place. SANDSTORM's shins, and all of the other Coneheads' shins for that matter, have been retooled to have much longer and cartoon-accurate knee pads, which for some reason aren't able to fold up, so they just lie on top of the front skirt, on the underside of which is the only flight stand port in this mode. So if you want to take some quick and easy pics of this guy in jet mode that don't look like shit, you're out of luck. Being a retool, SANDSTORM's transformation is almost identical to that of the vanilla Seeker trio, with the only real changes coming from his modified wings. This only amounts to pulling the legs away from the torso before you flip up the double joints where his wings would have been in a different life. Other than that, it's a standard affair that we've all seen 3 times over now. What confounded me when I first got him was how brutally tight the peg was keeping his right arm compressed, but with time that's loosened up considerably, though it remains solid as ever. As it turns out, putting all the robot mode bits on the bottom side of a plane, when all the interesting color work happens up top, is a really good way to make sure your robot mode looks boring as shit. Seriously, from the front, SANDSTORM looks unfinished. He has paint in all the same places as on his normal winged brethren, but it does barely anything to break up this massive sea of khaki. He has some brown on his skirt and biceps, but it's not enough. Black plastic is used for his shoulder and elbow joints, and I really think his gloves and hands should have been cast in that same black, as well as his feet, with the black paint replaced with silver or something. That, I feel, would have made the dominance of tan much less oppressive. The remolded chest piece is pretty bad off as things stand. Even with the pecs filled in with black, I still think he needs some more black or even some silver on these other boxes, or something. The remolded shins have a good share of paint, but this white just doesn't cut it in terms of contrast. It looks off, to say the least. Like I mentioned previously, all the interesting paintwork remains on his back, which is kind of a mess. The vestigial wing shards don't really have a proper place to rest or lock or anything, so they're just left back here sticking up into the sky. They don't get in the way of movement or anything and are invisible from most angles, but I just hate how sloppy it is. In my initial review of Earthrise Starscream, I expressed my wish that the engineers would somehow hide the nose cone for the then-upcoming Conehead retools. They did not. I'm not mad or even disappointed that the head doesn't actually turn into the actual nose cone, since the size discrepancy is just too great to make it feasible, but I really wish they put in some effort to stuff it into the torso instead of keeping it visible. It's one thing to use faux parts when there really isn't any way around them. It's another thing to keep the real ones visible right next to the fake ones. SANDSTORM is by no means the one I want to flog with this particular whip, so I'll just save that for another time. That new head sculpt is really nice and shaped just right. He has a charcoal black face and piercing red eyes, which set him apart from the rest of his team. The legs are pretty much unchanged from the initial Earthrise release, with the modified engines and wings stapled onto the back, and since those wings are meant to be swept back, this has caused some reviewers to complain that the legs are too skinny. Now, there is a solution to this, but it's really complicated, so pay close attention. SANDSTORM, along with every other instance of the Earthrise Seeker mold, besides the just-revealed Studio Series Coronation Starscream, has 19 points of dedicated articulation, which is not great, especially when he's being outclassed by the past 4 figures I've reviewed, which were all deluxes. His biggest limitation by far is his lack of a waist joint, which is blocked by this locking tab from the cockpit, which you can see here thanks to this adjustable skirt armor. Another annoyance is the languid range of the ankle pivots. They're not the worst I've seen, but they're stiff in the way that they want to fight against sitting flush on the ground, which makes them not as useful as they could be. For what little consolation it is, at least the elbows and knees can bend in excess of 90 degrees. Like I've mentioned in past Seeker reviews, the Earthrise Seeker mold is an upgrade to the 2006 Classics mold, but it's still woefully ill-equipped to mesh with the posability renaissance of 2021. I've pretty much accepted that I won't be adding the Coneheads, my preferred trio of Seekers, to my collection in their Earthrise forms, but I am glad I was able to pick up SANDSTORM. He's not great, but he does add some new depth to a mold I've already covered 3 times over, and it's always interesting to see a completely cancelled toy finally see the light of day in one form or another. Not only that, it's always nice to see an entirely new character as well. I really hope that one day I could get a hold of the Thrust and Dirge variants, probably in the forms of Nacelle and Shattered Glass Dirge, but for now I think I'm content with my Seeker Quartet as it is, though I am tempted by the new Select's Generation 2 Ramjet, as his colors are far more interesting. While I enjoy him, I do feel that there are enough complaints surrounding this particular release to warrant demoting his rank to crummy. If you liked this video or otherwise found it helpful or informative, then please subscribe for more reviews like this in the future, and feel free to suggest topics for future reviews in the comments. When we return... I think I hear a moving van. This has been Kit Katastrophe. Transform and roll out.